Okay, thank you, everyone.
Yay, you remembered.
Yes, well, I didn't remember. Greg remembered. I need to set it up to automatically record. Yes, in big capital letters, he sent me a reminder. I'm going to hit pause officially until we get going, so that it's not me chatting. Hi, Chris.
Good evening, Megan and everyone. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Okay, we have all our panelists here now. So can you guys all hear me, or do I need to put a headset on? Perfect. Okay, because this microphone's very finicky on my thing. So I'm gonna. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for coming here. Like I said just a minute ago, we're going to start with a forum on what's called Prove It First. It has been known as a great concept that's been pushed out, both as a bill, and we've also done it previously as we've tried it a couple times as a resolution at the DFL state conventions. So I'd just like to welcome our panelists. We have Senator Jen McEwen from SD8, which is mostly Duluth. We have Dr. Libby Bent, who is with Duluth for Clean Water and also a board member of the DFL Environmental Caucus. And then we have Chris Knopp, who is the executive director of Friends of the Boundary Water, and Scott Beauchamp, who's are you the policy director, Scott? Is that your term? Policy director of Friends of the Boundary Waters as well. So having said that, I'm just going to start off with a little bit. Our format's just going to be, I'm going to pass it off to Senator McEwen first. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bill that she's introduced before and is doing again this session. Then I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Libby Bent, who's going to speak primarily to a lot of the science and things that go on with the Duluth complex and the mining and the things that are way above my head because I'm a lawyer and not a scientist. And then we'll move on to Scott Beauchamp and Chris Knopp to talk really about citizen action, Prove It First as a concept, and anything that we can do to help this bill get passed. And if you have any questions, and then we'll try to leave a little time at the end for some Q&A. We have about an hour. So if you have any questions, Greg Layden is labeled send questions here. So please just type in the chat questions to him and then he'll feed it to me and the panelists. Anyway, so having said that, I would like to start with Senator Jen McEwen. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great, and it's so nice to see all of these faces. Thanks very much for the invitation to join all of you. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be able to spend a little time with you and with such great organizers and people who are doing the grassroots on the ground work to organize around these issues that are so near and dear to all of our hearts and matter so much for us and for the future generations that are coming up after us. So thanks for this invitation. Would you like me to just talk a little bit about just the basic concept of Prove It First for people who might need a refresher? Would that be good, Megan?
Yeah, why don't you start off with that and talk a little bit about what your bill is going to do?
Yeah, for sure. So the bill is called Prove It First, and many of you are quite familiar with it because of your own work, as Megan noted. But what it does is it places essentially a moratorium on copper sulfide mining in Minnesota, in any watershed in Minnesota, unless and until the proposer of any project was able to demonstrate that a similarly situated, that a mine of that type had been operating in the United States for 10 years and then had also been closed for 10 years without polluting the watershed. So it provides a sort of 20-year prove it up time period where any proposer of a copper sulfide operation would have to just show that they could do this safely before we would consider their proposal. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It doesn't take a whole lot of explanation. I think that we might even have a number. I should have looked up the number for the bill. Maybe Scott knows what it is. But yeah, but we have it filed. We're just about to kind of formally re-announce that bill here coming up this next week, and try again and build the support for it within our, well, thank you. It's Senate File 1416, in case people want to jot that down, 1416. And so yeah, that's what the bill does. It's and it's very it is sort of the common sense bill that it responds to that concern that all of us have throughout the state, but those of us especially who live in downstream communities from where some of these proposals have been brought forward of it's not as if people in my district are against economic development or against good jobs. In fact, we're pro-economic development and we're pro great jobs. And that's one of the reasons we don't want to see this industry come, because it's a threat to all of those things. So unless and until they can prove it, we're not going to consider it. We're only going to consider it once they can kind of prove up to us that they have an example, a concrete example of having done this safely. So, and it is also a good response, the bill itself, to a lot of the claims that we have heard over the years here in Duluth as these projects, as the Polymet project, the Glencore Polymet project was introduced, that they have these sweeping claims about the safety and about the technology that they're going to use, which is, of course, not true. And we've seen the dam design problem. We've seen all sorts of problems with that Glencore Polymet proposal. And they can't point to an example where they have had a mine like this where it didn't pollute the watershed, so that they would want to be doing it here in our beloved watersheds. The Glencore Polymet proposal, of course, is in the Lake Superior watershed and is a tremendous threat both to the drinking water of the city of Duluth and the people who live in that area of the lake, but to the lake itself. The greatest lake in the world, the greatest freshwater lake in the world. So we're going to protect Lake Superior. We're going to protect our watersheds in Minnesota. And this Prove It First bill is a very common sense, nuts and bolts way to do it. And we can talk about it later on. If people have some questions about strategy and whatnot, we can talk maybe a little bit about that too. I'm talking to friendly Democratic farmer labor friends here, and we all know that a lot of the problem is within our own house, right? So we can talk about that maybe a little bit as well. And also, Megan, I need to let you know that I have another meeting at about, I can go a little bit late to it. So if I left it like 20 to 8 or 15 to 8, that would probably be okay. So I might have to pop out a little bit early, but I'll hang around for discussion as long as I can.
Well, thank you. Well, it works out that you ended up first on the panel. Well, thank you so much, Senator McEwen, for being here. Next, as she's starting to talk about some of the things the bill is going to do, and discussing saving the watersheds, which is one of mine. I know Senator McEwen lives in a watershed. Several of us on this call tonight live in one of the watersheds. I live in the Rainy River watershed. Right, Rainy Lake is about 200 feet behind me. Oh, a little more than that. And so right on the cusp of Voyageurs National Park, which as the crow flies is less than 100 miles from where the Twin Metals site is proposed to be. Having said that, a bad break or anything, as Libby's going to be talking about in a minute, it really could be catastrophic and go quite a long distance. So I'll pass it off to Libby Bent.
Thanks, Megan. And I just wanted to thank you, Senator McEwen, and friends for your consistent, steadfast work on this legislation. I mean, I'm all for proving things. And as Senator McEwen said, it's common sense. And I was actually thinking that we are having this conversation because of a violent geologic event that happened 1.1 billion years ago when the continent, attempted to break apart. And then that volcanic activity created this sulfide mineral deposits in a swath that reaches from basically Duluth up to the Canadian border. And this Duluth complex is touted as one of the largest undeveloped copper nickel resources. But these are disseminated low-grade sulfide ores that would require tremendous amounts of energy and water to obtain. And Bob Tamman, as you have long pointed out, Minnesota ore doesn't make the grade. It falls below global averages. And so, for example, the North Met deposit that PolyMet wants to mine contains copper, nickel, silver, gold, palladium, platinum, cobalt, that together make up less than 1% of the total ore. So that means 99% is waste. And PolyMet's dam permit, for example, would allow them to store 225 million tons of waste rock in a tailings dam that was built in the 50s on compressed peat, glacial till, fractured bedrock. The geophysicist David Chambers has said it's like building on mud. And as you're aware, these types of dams are failing and being banned around the world. And I know you know too about the toxic acid mine drainage that forms when the sulfide ores are exposed to air and water. They form sulfuric acid that leaches out heavy metals from the rock. Not everyone is as aware that sulfate pollution in Minnesota is a triple whammy, basically. In low oxygen conditions, bacteria, you could say they breathe sulfate and produce sulfide, which is toxic to wild rice. And in mercury polluted sediment, which we have a lot of, you get toxic methyl mercury produced that bioaccumulates up the food chain. And sulfate accelerates decomposition of plants. So the phosphorus and nitrogen nutrients lead to toxic algae blooms. It's just not a good thing in Minnesota's lakes and streams. And if you think about where we're talking about this Duluth complex, this is Minnesota's iconic landscape, fragile ecosystem of the Arrowhead region. It just cannot become a demonstration project for sulfide ore mining in a water-rich environment. So the Arrowhead, as I know you all know this, it's an 1854 ceded territory. The tribes retain the rights to hunt, fish, and gather, and that means that we trample treaty rights if wild rice and fish are poisoned. The northeastern corner of our state is defined by its boreal forest ecosystem and its waters. And the North American boreal forest is the largest intact forest remaining on Earth. 1.2 billion acres are still intact, and there are only 4 other large intact forest regions in the world. They're collectively referred to as the family of 5. A boreal forest stores almost twice as much carbon per acre as a tropical forest. And then finally, Minnesota's Arrowhead contains this rare triple divide, one of only 4 in North America. It's called the Hill of Three Waters, where the waters flow north to the Hudson Bay, east through the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, and then south into the Gulf of Mexico. And one of these waters is the largest US tributary to Lake Superior, the St. Louis River, that creates this rare and biodiverse 12,000 acre freshwater estuary that we love in Duluth before emptying into Lake Superior. So yeah, not the place to do a demonstration project for sulfide ore mining. And the question always comes up, what about the need for these metals for a green energy economy? If you look at projections, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, projects that demand for nickel and cobalt will increase by 20 times by 2040 and lithium by 40 times. Copper demand is projected to nearly double over the next decade. But the thing is that projections are often wrong. So one thing is that battery chemistry continues to evolve towards more abundant and cheaper materials like silicon over graphite or sodium, maybe even aluminum over lithium, iron over cobalt and nickel. And some of these batteries are not in production yet. We need to buy some time. But some, like the lithium iron phosphates, the LFPs you may have heard of, don't require nickel or cobalt and are used in standard range vehicles today. And the projections are also based on this 40-year trend to heavier vehicles. There is a recent study that just came out of UC Davis. It's called Achieving Zero Emissions with More Mobility and Less Mining. And it points out that reversing the trend to these ever larger vehicles, which require ever bigger batteries, is key for reducing mineral demand and monumentally important for decarbonizing the transportation sector. So producing EVs and building and maintaining roads, highways, parking lots, they're all energy and emission intensive with high levels of embodied carbon. So something like half the pollution from a vehicle just comes from its manufacture. And of course, the heavier the vehicle, the more air pollution from the tires and the asphalt and the brakes, with low income areas bearing the brunt of the health burden. So along with electrifying vehicles, this study concludes that decreasing car usage, reducing the size and weight of personal vehicles, and creating a robust recycling system, we have a long way to go with our recycling, will give us a shot of limiting warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees. It will protect the ecosystems that are under pressure from mining, provide transit equity, and respect Indigenous rights. And I was just reading recently that globally 54% of projects that would extract clean energy minerals overlap with Indigenous lands. And these projects are being fast-tracked at the expense of these lands. So I was just also recently reading about the Thacker Pass lithium mining project in Nevada, where the tribes did not even have a chance to weigh in. And the mining activities would be 24/7 for 40 years or something. So yes, prove it first. Don't carry out a forever experiment for minerals for which there are alternatives, while irreversibly destroying and degrading ecosystems in Minnesota's singular Arrowhead region.
Well, Libby, thank you so much. That is awesome news about the UC Davis study. I mean, this is why you're so great and have all these wonderful studies to keep us updated on. We'll definitely come back. I know a lot of us are going to have questions for you regarding this. But now I'm going to just pass it off to Chris Knopp or Scott Beauchamp, however you two want to divide this up between the two of you. Thanks.
Sure. Scott and I will tag team on this one here. And first of all, I want to thank everyone on the call here and thank Senator McEwen and the Environmental Caucus here. Sort of two big picture things. At the last DFL state convention, we had 58% of the delegates support the Prove It First resolution. So we have a solid majority of the DFL delegates supporting Prove It First, and I'm very confident that with all of your continued action on this, that we'll get over the 60% threshold to make it part of the party platform here. And then secondly, all of your communications with elected officials have really made a difference here. And so we're at the threshold, at a bit of a tipping point where we can get over the hurdle and have a new paradigm here. But we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. And so your support, your actions are really the secret sauce to success here. And I think that the citizen engagement, your engagement, elected officials listen to their constituents, and you are the voice of the people that makes a difference here. And I'm going to kick it over to Scott, and then I want to talk about a specific question I want to pose to everyone here. But Scott, why don't you pick it up from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Hard to add too much more other than to say that, I think that this legislation is really necessary. And I think that it's something that we all here want to see. And it's not just us, right? I think across Minnesota, polling shows that this is a popular law. There's 68 legislators that support this. And actually there's more to that because some signed on to the House bill that I never even spoke with. So that was great to see. And so, we're approaching 70 plus legislators. And that's all because of, people like yourself. They don't necessarily do that because I wish that they did it because I'm so charming and convincing, but really it's because you all tell them and you vote for them and they listen to you. You're their boss, and that's how it should be. So keep that up. I'm happy to talk about it. I know Chris is going to talk about kind of the next opportunity for everyone to get involved here. So yeah, we were planning some big things and looking forward to seeing everybody in person, hopefully.
Great. And I'll do two things now. First, lay out a calendar from now until April 4th for you to have a few dates on the calendar. This Wednesday, we'll have one of our Lunch with the Friends programs where we talk about our legislative initiatives, including Prove It First. So this Wednesday at noon, you should be receiving an invite for that webinar that I know Senator Jen McEwen will be on that for part of it as well. So thank you, Senator McEwen, for that. The following week, next Tuesday, which is February 21st, we'll have a press conference at the Capitol at about 10:30. Scott, is that about right? We have the room from 10 to 11.
Yep, that's right.
Great. And so if you could be there for that press conference, well, it'll be to really highlight the introduction of Prove It First back into the legislative session. So that's next Tuesday at between 10 and 11 at the Capitol. And you could contact Scott or myself here. We can provide you with the specifics, but having you as citizens, as active members of the DFL Environmental Caucus will be really important to that. And then on April 4th, we're going to have Friends of the Boundary Waters Day at the Capitol. And so we will, it'll culminate with a rally at the Rotunda in the early afternoon around 1:30. But throughout that morning, what we'll do is we'll have people come in the morning, meet us at a table, and then go to their elected officials in person. And if you can't make it in person, we'll have resources to reach out electronically or by phone to your elected representatives. So those are our three sort of milestone dates. And then I want to pose a kind of a conundrum that's before us here, and just to we can have a candid conversation here.
Chris,
so
hold on. I'm going to add one thing before you get into this, because I know it's going to go to another. So one more thing about that press conference on Tuesday. If you want to come, we'll have Prove It First signs. We'll have Prove It First t-shirts, and basically all of us will stand behind our fearless leaders, Jen and Chris, and maybe a couple other people on this call that might say a few words, and we'll kind of cheer them on, and hopefully it'll make for a good press image. So if anybody is free, we'd really love to have you come down, and we'll get you a free t-shirt and a free t-shirt, free sign. And then the second thing is, if you are able to participate on April 4th, please shoot me an email. Let me know. We're looking for kind of district captains to set up meetings with elected officials. And then we'll be able to have other people who can join, and you can all go like 10 at once instead of having to go, 10 individual times. So those are my two plugs. As Chris mentioned, if you're able to come, let us know. We'll get some t-shirts for you. And on the 4th, if you're around, please let us know, and we'd love to have you as a district captain, or just even come down and say hi. All right. Anyway, there you go, Chris.
Great. Thanks for that. Those additions there. And so here's the conundrum for us here in the Minnesota Senate. There is a DFL majority, right? 34-33. But that doesn't mean that there's a full clean water majority. And so if we brought Prove It First to a vote in the Senate committee, it would likely not pass. It would likely lose 6-4. I think there are 10 committee members. And so we don't want to have a loss in the column, if bringing it up to, we don't want to bring it up to a vote and lose. It's sort of the bottom line. So so the time to have a hearing on the bill would probably be the week of March 6th. And so those days where the committee meets that Senator McEwen is part of would be that Tuesday and Wednesday, March 7th or March 9th. And so we'd love to have a hearing on it and kind of bring out the, what you heard from Libby Bent here and what Senator McEwen brought forth as well, but we don't want it to lose. And so that's kind of the conundrum. So if we were to have a hearing, maybe we don't ask for a vote on it. And so there are some parliamentary legislative procedures where we could maybe do that. But I just kind of wanted to let you know that's where we're at there. That we simply don't have the votes to get it to pass in the Senate Environment Committee. And so I wanted to, maybe that'll stimulate real conversation among all of us, how to, that is the challenge that we're facing as as advocates for Prove It First and advocates for clean water.
And I,
So
I
ba-
think if anybody on this call happens to live in the district just north of our good Senator McEwen, Mr. Housechild is kind of that vote that we are losing on right now.
And Senator Hoffman as well, right, Scott? So we have those two senators, and those are the two that are kind of, those are the two votes against us that tip the balance against us. And so, what maybe this time what we do is have everyone in Senator Houschild's district and Senator Hoffman's district really send emails to them and let them know where they feel about Prove It First, and make the heat, put the heat on. But we can't bring it, I don't want to bring it to a vote and have it lose, and that's kind of the challenge that we have here, that we're facing right now.
Thank you. And I think, Greg, you have a question for Libby.
Yeah, Libby, we have a question of everybody's asking this question. Could you elaborate on the copper ore or other ore as well percentages a little more in the Minnesota deposits? Because it's variable and complicated a little bit in relation to other, just how great is it to mine copper up there, really?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's variable. And I believe the sort of average in the North Met deposit is 0.28 or 0.29 copper, like 0.08% nickel. And worldwide, I think I've seen the figure that the average is more like 0.6. And in some places, like maybe the DRC, you get up to 3% copper. So we're talking, I should actually ask Bob Pannon, and he knows more about this, but the grade is definitely below the world average at this point in the North Met deposit. The one thing the nickel deposit in the Palin mine is they're doing all those core sampling, and I think they're finding some higher grade nickel there. So there's I don't think that's considered as low grade, which doesn't mean that it's a good project. It's just that it's not the 0.08% nickel that's in the North Met ore body. But other people probably have things to add to that.
Yeah, I would like to see someone work out the extent of the mining that would be required to make have a certain result. Like if we need to mine this to build 10,000 windmills or 35,000 windmills, which is actually a more realistic number. How big of a mine is that? And not that the copper would go to those windmills, it was going to go overseas, but just how big of a mine is that compared to what they're proposing now? That's what I
would comment that a few years ago, Polymet was asked whether their production would move the price of copper. And one of their executives, and I got the copy of the interview, I think it was in the Tribune, he says their production would amount to less than 1 day of global production. So Polymet itself is very small. And when you want to talk about the percentage of ore, what complicates things, when you talk about the percentage of ore, the first thing you have to do is define the size of your ore body. And so the promoters like to be vague about this. They say we have a huge ore body, and I've seen presentations by UMD geologists that say it's a 10 billion ton ore body. They're including everything. They're going out to the fringes of the ore body. So that's where you hit your low grade ore body. So if you accept their argument, it's a 10 billion ore body, that's going to lower the percentage of copper. When they talk about percentage of nickel copper, they like to pick a little plum like over there at Talon Metals, and you'll probably get a little higher percentage. But as soon as you enlarge that ore body to the size they claim they can mine, you lower your ore down to less than 1%. And so you're pretty safe saying that this ore body, broadly defined, is way less than 1% copper, nickel, precious metals.
Thanks, Bob. And I have Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, and along the same lines, in the early parts, at least, before an environmental impact statement or anything like that, they're not really giving the public the data. They're not providing in detail, the three-dimensional view of their mine. That's I think it's generally very confidential. So they're letting their investors see, maybe handpicked data, and their investors might demand that they show them more data, but MPCA can't do that. At least I don't think. At least not until the permitting process is much, much further along, and I'm not sure they ever would. So we're kind of in the dark about that. I had a question though for I guess anybody, but I was thinking of Libby. I was thinking where I used to live in Arizona, so I've seen a lot of copper mines, and have read about a lot of others. And it seems like, aren't they virtually all in dry areas? I can't, other than the one in Canada that did fail a couple of years ago. I'm not sure how many copper mines are in regions like this. Never mind the value of the forest resource and all that. But just in terms of prove it first, it's kind of difficult because there might not be anything that's comparable. And also it could backfire. It could say, well, look, we have a mine down in Globe, Arizona. It hasn't had a problem, therefore you won't have a problem.
I'm going to let Jen answer this because I know you might have to jump off, Jen. Or sorry, Senator McEwen.
Yeah, there's actually, thanks for this question, Larry. It's a good question. And there is actually language in the bill. If you, where am I going here? I wanted to, if you go into our chat, I believe there's a link posted to the revisor, and I'm going to pull it up, the text. Okay. The mine must have operated in the United States in a similar environment to the mine for which the permit is sought, and must have used reclamation techniques substantially similar to those proposed in the permit application. So there is language that is something that we have thought of course, that we don't want someone to just be able to say, hey, we did this in a desert somewhere and you can't measure the damage to the water or something like that and say that that meets the burden under the law.
I know in my home state of Nevada, they do this sulfide mining. It is night and day because there's not a lot of groundwater in Nevada, and they actually use like a tarp and kind of melt it down almost, but where's it going to go? Because there's no groundwater. It's not like the issue that we have here. Not trying to say that's great doing it in Nevada. I'm just trying to say it's night and day. So you can't compare what they do in central Nevada to what they're going to do here. And then Senator McEwen, I have a couple of questions for you on this. The first one being, there's a couple other bills, and this would kind of go with both Senator McEwen and Scott and Chris. There's been kind of a few other bills that we've talked about that were kind of relating to some of our resolutions that we did last year, both the bad actors and splitting the duties of both the mining promotion and regulation between the DNR and DEED. Do you anticipate any of that coming up this session?
Yes, absolutely. Some of that is introduced. So we have the biggest one. Well, I don't want to say the biggest one, but the one that received the most support at the last convention was the DNR Conflict of Interest Act. A lot of people don't realize this. The DNR actually has an obligation to promote mining as well as to protect natural resources, although I'd imagine some people on this call do know that. And so, actually, thanks to your resolution, that did pass. And so that should be a part of the action agenda now. And so that was amazing. That received 63% support. That bill is introduced. That is introduced by Senator Kelly Morrison and then Representative Jess Hansen in the House, who is Jess Hansen is an amazing rep. She is not afraid, and she is very much like Senator McEwen in that regard. And so that's the champions that we need. And so that is introduced. There's also the bad actor bill has been introduced, and then we also are working on one that is regarding financial assurance for these mines. and ensuring that they pay that upfront and in cash, which that's a whole nother conversation. We're working on, I don't know, actually, Senator McEwen, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know if you got that back from the revisor. I think it might be with, basically that one is in the works and should be ready to go anytime now.
That's all right. That's correct. And I think that Larry had a little follow-up too.
Well, first of all, Libby pointed out, I don't know if that went to me only or to other people, there is a mine in Michigan that is also in the wet environment in the United States, but she said it's not comparable, and I'm not quite sure why. But the legal problem I envision, and I kind of ran into something like this when I was doing some consulting for a group that was fighting a ban on water softeners in California. You know, and the judge said you just can't do that. You have to show that there's an effect. And so, I mean, if these things aren't enforceable, it becomes difficult. And if there's no comparable mines, and Libby offered up that the one in Michigan isn't comparable. If there's no comparable mines, how can you say? I mean, you may prove it first, impossible, and therefore I think an administrative judge would say it's not enforceable. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know that, but it seems that this might be more fallible than I would have thought of an hour ago or half an hour ago.
Well, Larry, maybe I'll respond to that. I mean, what we're doing, Wisconsin had this law for 20 years, and you know, the essentially what our bill gets at is the environmental harm that will result from this type of mining in Minnesota. So it's putting it's exposing the fallacy that these mines won't poison the water. And so, you know, if they, and so what this bill will stimulate is that conversation where about that. And so this is not, you know, and so this bill is clearly enforceable. It was in place in Wisconsin for 20 years. And so it lasted challenges to that. It was only when Scott Walker led its repeal in 2017. So I think this bill would withstand, you know, constitutional scrutiny. It's just, in addition to all the other requirements that these mines would have to adhere to, we'd have this basic question put forth, you know, essentially, has this been done safely elsewhere? And if not, we're not going to do it here. And so, you know, I think that's, so I don't think it would really suffer from, you know, constitutional challenges. I don't think that would be a real problem here.
I'm not so worried about the enforceability piece myself.
Yeah. The analog environment is Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And so it's Wisconsin versus Minnesota. Who goes first? And then they can prove it, and the other one can do it. So we'll see how long that lasts.
Yes, right. And I do have one question. I know, Senator McEwen, you do have to jump off in about 2 minutes. I know, Ashley, I do see your hand up, but I'm just one other thing that kind of came through for you is, I know Chris and Scott kind of talked about like the two senators to kind of target on this, but being in the Senate yourself, what are kind of the important things that you think that some of these kind of flipped votes that you might think these senators that are kind of on the edge might want to hear, or even people that do support it might want to hear to get them more supportive of this?
I think that it really is a sort of numbers thing. So I think it will be very helpful to have the coalition around Prove It First and these initiatives, do some, you know, activating their base, activating people to contact all of, you know, their senators, their legislators. I also think it's helpful if people do have more time and ability to do this. Obviously, leadership, meeting with our leadership, you know, sending messages to Senator Dietzich in the Senate, Representative Portman in the House, Representative Long, just really making it clear just how, you know, the vote also within the DFL of the 58%, that's huge. And that it really is building more and more of that consensus that, you know, we have moved things a lot, even within the Senate where, you know, Chris was correctly saying that unfortunately, I don't believe at this point that we would have the votes to pass through the Environment Committee, but we're pretty close. They're pretty close. And we've also gotten to a point where our friends in the DFL party who may be wanting to sort of flirt with this industry or court it a little bit are a little bit hesitant to just come right out and fly the flag in support of it too, because it's just become so clear that their base doesn't want this. So, or very key constituencies within their base don't want it. So keep that up, keep talking about it, keep talking about how it's just a common sense thing, talking about our waters. If you need any help on any sort of, prompting with the things that the different issues that you would want to raise, Friends of the Boundary Waters, my office, your own leadership in the DFL Environmental Caucus, we can provide materials to if you need prompts.
Thank you. And like she said, with the polling and the numbers, I live in Senator Hochschild's district, and I consider Senator Hochschild a friend. I'm the chair of my Senate district, and he's the vice chair. And I know this is a touchy issue up here. And they've done polling up here, and this is Bob Tanneman's district as well. He lives on the way other side of it than I do. He's on the far east, I'm on the far west. But, if you poll our district, it's like 2/3 are not in favor of it. And you find this to be a nonpartisan issue. So even people that don't identify as DFL might still not support it, or they don't really have a lot of knowledge of the issue and can very much be educated on it. Thank you, Senator McEwen. Have a great night, your next meeting. And can very much be educated on this issue. And I have found myself educating some of my Republican friends on this issue to talk to them about that. There's a lot of people up here that are resort owners, fishing guides, outfitters that don't identify as a Democrat, that are still not in support of this issue. And they are great ones to target to try to reach out to people like Senator Hochschild, who won his seat by 83 votes. Ashley, you have a question.
Yeah, so either Scott or Chris would be able to answer this for me, I guess. So I currently work for Rights of Nature-based organization, and so we worked within the tribal court system with regards to water protection rights and with Enbridge and Polymet. And so I was wondering if, with regards to Prove It First, if there's been any sort of coalition or allyship within the Rights of Nature wing of the Democratic and Labor movement in order to push Prove It First even farther.
I think the answer is no, but there needs to be, and it needs to be as soon as possible, definitely. So I think I'll follow up probably with you, Ashley, on that, because yeah, that's a great idea. And we do have a coalition of groups and legislators supporting this, but including obviously DFL EC, but the more the merrier. And as you said, that's a huge part of this too. That's a huge part when we're talking about people's water, but not just people, right? The St. Louis River is the main tributary for Lake Superior. I don't think I have to convince anybody on this call how important it is to protect Lake Superior, just as one, right? As that's just one thing that comes to mind for me. So yeah, certainly we'll be in touch.
I wonder, Libby, do you have an answer, any kind of follow-up to that Rights of Nature question? Because I know it's been a pretty big issue for you as well the past couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And Ashley, thanks for everything you're doing there too. The group that is working on the Rights of Nature for the St. Louis Estuary is gearing up, and I believe aiming for a vote, a referendum vote for the next election in Duluth. And it'd be nice to connect with that group to maybe get more information on what they're up to. There's also the Mississippi group, and I believe they're also kind of pushing forward on this Rights of Nature. So between the two, it sort of is leading us towards perhaps a statewide effort. In Florida, they're working on a statewide, I don't know where that stands right now, like a statewide effort to give all their waterways the rights of nature is what I understand. Maybe you know more about that, Ashley.
Yeah, my boss is actually the one in charge of that and put the bill together. And Governor Chris was really a big proponent of that and pushing it through. So the loss of the governorship in Florida was pretty devastating for us. I am talking with the Duluth Rights of Nature. I was just kind of wondering, to see exactly what we could possibly do, on multiple legal levels to kind of really strengthen that and help with enforceability down the road. So thank you, Libby and Scott, for answering that for me.
I think the rights of nature, just as an attorney who's done some environmental law in the past, would make it really helpful in things like this. So you won't necessarily have to have standing in ways like I would, being a part of this watershed or belonging to organizations that have members in the watershed or Friends of the Boundary Waters the same way. You could have a lot of people that just can sue on behalf of that. We had another question come through in the chat, and this would probably go to Scott or Chris regarding support in the House for this bill. What are you looking at as far as numbers of support for the House, or any particular legislators there we could target?
Yes,
Sure.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, there are.
Scott, maybe I'll tee it up for you here. That in the House Environment Committee, it's chaired by Rick Hansen of South St. Paul, and so that's where these bills would be heard. And so I think that communicating with Representative Rick Hansen on this would be beneficial. That would be in the House, kind of putting the pressure there. Scott, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of an interesting position in the House in a similar way to the Senate. They only also have a small majority, of which at least one, Dave Lisselgard, is very much against us. But there's probably a couple that we have some idea about that, as Senator McEwen mentioned earlier, that are maybe not with us, but they're like afraid to say that, right? But they still have pull. So Speaker Hortman, I think, needs to hear from all of us. I think that she needs to know that this is something that the voters want to see. I personally believe that she would be with us on the issue. She seems like someone that follows the science. But again, getting that action to move forward, because our opponents are, the more success we have, the more desperate they become in some ways, and they threaten to leave the party or do other things like that, or stall other issues, just to stop us from having a hearing on our bills. So in some ways it's weird but the House is almost even more difficult, because of those dynamics. We do fortunately have some allies in Representative Hollins and Representative Jamie Long, are both supporters of this. And like I said, we're growing it more and more. I was very pleasantly surprised to see a couple of reps that I had no idea supported us sign on to the bill when it got introduced today. So that was excellent. But yeah, Speaker Hortman, Rick Hansen, I think Rick is totally with us in his heart, but he needs to feel like he's got the support behind him to push forward, because he knows he's going to get a lot of crap back, unfortunately. And then of course, just your own representatives, if they support us, thank them, because that's not an easy thing to do necessarily on this, even if that's where their heart is. And if not, let us know, and let's see what we can do to get a meeting or get them on board.
Thanks. And I do see hands up, but I'm just going to kind of go through some of the things that have come in the chat. And from John Wells, we have, do you know of any Republicans in either chamber that are supportive of this bill?
Do you want me to take that, Chris?
Sure.
So we know of a couple that behind the scenes are very likely with us. We're trying to move forward on that. The one thing about the Republicans is, they are very united. They're very good at sticking together on this issue, and they kind of view it as a way of splitting the Democrats. And I think, this is my personal analysis of the situation, but I think that they view it as a political win for them to support these mines, because they view it, they can get some Democrats mad at the other Democrats, right? So even though we know from polling, we have Republican members and Friends of the Boundary Waters, we know from polling, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but we had a woman who was running for state rep who was like, yep, and she was Republican. She's like, this is great. I don't know why I wouldn't support this. She called Curtin out, and then the next day she didn't want to seek our endorsement anymore. And so they're really tight on that. So if anything we can do to break anyone free. You know, I think we kind of joke in-house that, you know, one Republican on this issue would be worth 10 Democrats, right? You know, because that would be amazing. So it's unfortunately there are Republicans that are with us, some voters, some former elected officials, but we have yet to be able to get any sitting elected officials on board. But if you have any ideas, we're all ears.
Sorry, just going through some of the other ones on the chat that have been coming through. So would you just kind of say there might be some silent supporters out there then?
Absolutely.
I can make a couple.
Absolutely.
I'll make a couple comments on the support issue too, because we are trying, you know, we're all trying to organize legislative action. And for those who have asked, we will send out to our listserv. If you remember, you'll get that. Any of the stuff that Scott and Chris give us or we come up with on this, we will distribute it to all of our members. There's another group called the Minnesota Legislative Action Group, which is an indivisible group, and we're sending that out to everybody. But one thing to keep in mind is, who do you talk to? Committee chairs. Remember to contact committee chairs and leadership. And then if you have a member on one of those two committees, then you're in a special position, because those members of the House or the senators, especially the senators, prefer to hear from their own people. And that's an opportunity you can do that. But just a larger scale comment is that we had, even though it was amazing and everyone was it was quite an accomplishment, the PRO Act, the 100% energy, a handful of other bills went through with a lot of consternation and arm waving and hand wringing, but they went through. The DFL is 100% in all those areas. And now in the legislature, we're starting to hit the issues where the DFL is not 100%. And it's the Family Leave Act, for example. They're not 100% on this, and on this issue here. And we're just, obviously leadership put the bills they could get 100% on first. And we're now in this transition where over the next few weeks, we're going to be hitting those the speed bumps where the DFL in general is not. And that is where, this is just a big picture comment. This is where if you're not going to your DFL caucuses in February, you got to go to the DFL caucuses in February. You got to be the people putting these individuals in the political process to begin with, and in some cases, endorsing people that are going to back up, prove it first, and similar environmental legislation, and maybe even in primaries, winning with those people. Because just like if the PRO Act went in before the Minnesota House with the DFL majority 2 years ago, it would not have passed. There was not a fully pro-abortion DFL House, and there isn't necessarily a fully environmental DFL House either. And that's the transition we have to make. This another 2-year cycle. We have to win more.
And that was great, because I know Scott and I did a handful, we did a bunch of trainings last year for people doing that, you know, just not telling them how to run for delegate, how to push Prove It First through. And like I said, it was just, we were so close in Rochester in May. But at the same time, it really does show that the majority of the party, that people in the active in the party do support this. We just haven't quite made it over that line. So we're doing that. I know, Larry, you had your hand up again a little bit ago. Did you still have a question?
You are muted.
Larry Baker?
I had a question in terms of tactics for Chris or whoever, Scott, whoever wants to answer. Other than, you know, we want jobs on the range or something like that, which has been done over and over, where are some weak points in their defense? And they say, I'm not going to vote for this because, you know, other than the standard stuff, what is it that's keeping them? Don't they believe the idea, or I don't know.
So no, I think that's a great question, Larry. And actually, I just wanted to bring something back up that you were talking about earlier. I apologize. So just so everyone knows, the only examples, there are examples in water-rich environments of these mines, but we have good evidence that they polluted, including the Eagle mine. And the reason that wouldn't be, it would be considered substantially similar, But the reason that Dr. Bent said that was just because it's way smaller. That's what she was referring to, the much smaller mine. But we do have evidence that polluted as well as Flambeau. So I just wanted to put that out there. We're very confident that even those mines that they claim are safe, they did pollute, and we're happy to put the science up for that. To answer your other question, I think it really all comes down to two things. One is a trend we've seen more recently, where these companies and their supporters are going all in and actually trying to take as these mines are what we need for the environment. And the argument is that we need these metals to stop climate change. When there's, of course, as any good bad faith argument, right? There's a little bit of truth to it, and then they twist it until it's not true anymore. And so, as Dr. Bent laid out earlier, there's many other ways to get it. There's many other places. I would put forward that this is one of the worst possible places to get it, in the entire country. But there are, a lot of other ways that we can get it. And these mines in particular would be a very small part. So it's not really a very true argument, but it does hold weight if you haven't heard about it. You're like, oh, I care about climate change. Yeah, I know we need more solar panels and electric vehicles. So I think that's one area that we're trying to push back against. And I think the other one, which is honestly, frankly, this is what's been driving it for forever, and a lot of people on this call know this, is it's the L in labor, in the DFL, and not all labor, obviously, but 5 or 6 building construction trade labor unions are very much in support of these projects, and we think they're making the wrong calculation there, obviously. But I think that, they feel like they want to build these, they want those jobs, and they're very influential in the party, and so they're able to access some people that we have a harder time getting meetings with, just to be frank. And so I think that's really the elephant in the room on this issue. I think if the trade labor unions were not supportive of these mines, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. All this industry would have been shut down years and years ago, because there's really no good argument, in my opinion, for it. And so that's, I hate to be that direct because I love unions in general. I'm supportive of unions as an idea, obviously, and most unions are great. And even these ones do a lot of good things too. But on this issue, they are the driving force behind it in the DFL, I would say.
And to kind of, Larry, to build on Scott's comments here, I mean, the discussion has often been the jobs versus the environment. But I think the better way to frame it is how do we make these communities really strong? And if you were to ask a city manager, or the city clerk in Ely or any of these other communities, you would hear issues like having affordable housing. You'd have there's a shortage of plumbers and carpenters and all the trades there. And so I think having a strong vo-tech and community college program throughout the state, having free tuition for that, having a livable minimum wage and having a proper funding for our schools so they're strong. So when you go to the communities there, those are the issues on a day-to-day basis. And the sort of, the sort of pipe dream of getting 400 or 500 jobs, it's really deceiving these communities in a big way. And that the growth in these communities will be, in small jobs that, small businesses that bring in jobs 3, 4, 5, or 6 at a time. And we need to encourage that entrepreneurship in these communities and have access to capital for those small businesses. I think that's a way to have real long-term economic growth throughout greater Minnesota. So.
Is broadband a bargaining chip?
Well, I think that's part of the answer, on a lot of different levels, is having that basic infrastructure in place there. Obviously up the Gunflint Trail, they have broadband, but in Ely and other parts there, it's lacking. And so that's another part of having that basic infrastructure for the future that'll make the regions economically competitive with the rest of the world, really.
Bob, tell me.
As far as jobs, I helped build Hibbing-Taconite in 1974, and Aaron Brown, pretty good columnist, he had an article a few months ago that the Hibbing area has more employees in healthcare than they do in mining. And those healthcare jobs are pretty good jobs. And another point I'd make is, we have this image of our nice local mining companies. We got half a dozen taconite plants now. We only have 2 owners, Cleveland Cliffs and United States Steel. These are global corporations. They don't really care about our communities. We're better off to prepare for the future with healthcare rather than trying to pump up the mining industry or really the logging industry. We have the same problem there, I'm maybe going off on a little tangent here, but they've made the news big time that Huber Engineer Wood Products has canceled their plans for a plant over there by the other side of Grand Rapids. And, Pat and I live up here, and 30 years ago, I was thinking about going to work for Potlatch Corporation at their oriented strand board plant. Well, it's lucky I didn't, because it got sold off and went bankrupt. And I can look at a list of strand board plants from Cook over to Bemidji. There's probably at least half a dozen of them. None of them are operating. They all went broke or bankrupt. And so the fact that we didn't get another strand board plant started up, I think it's an indication that perhaps economically logging and mining are not the future of northern Minnesota. We have to diversify.
Thank you, Bob. And we have 2 more questions, but then we kind of got to wrap it up and get on to our meeting because it's a little after 8 right now. Peter Berglund.
Yeah, well, I think Bob touched on this obviously with jobs, but the tourism industry, that's got to be a lot of jobs. And I've heard the mining jobs would be small in number. So I don't know, any comments?
That's right, Peter. I mean, we have an existing economy that is threatened by these mines. And so there's hundreds of jobs in the outdoor recreation economy here that are threatened by it for, speculative jobs. The numbers are inflated because of increased technology in mining. And so we would threaten those, we would lose those existing jobs in the outdoor recreation economy if these mines go forward.
And a lot of the
And what I
jobs
just
are
shared
falling-
there in the chat is actually an economic analysis of this exact question from Harvard economist James Stock, if anyone is interested in looking more into that.
And a lot of these studies that were done on top of that, Scott, and I don't have them pulled up right now, but if any of you know them where the links are off the top of your head, a lot of these jobs that are doing this, I'm sorry, I live this too, just like everybody else. They're talking about really have to do the ancillary jobs for construction, which are going to last approximately 2 years, at which point a lot of these jobs are tech-based and they're not even going to be local. They can be outsourced to, I don't know, Seattle if you want it to be. I'm just making up a city. Having said that, there's also been a study done that looks like we are losing, what was it, about $500 million in private property as well, that is potentially able to be damaged during this. And that's just really right around the boundary waters in there in the Northwest St. Louis. This would be Northeast St. Louis and Lake and Cook counties. That doesn't even go up into how far it could go upstream or downstream. I always want to say upstream because North is technically downstream. Up the Rainy River up to where I live and into like Voyageurs National Park, Lake Cabotogama, and places like that, into on the western end of where the boundary was. So, and I know there's studies out there if you guys know where they are, you can pull them up, but that's just me remembering things off the top of my head. Alan Richardson.
Yes, just quickly, only because Bob mentioned the Huber Mill. As of 4 o'clock, the St. Louis County Commission is attempting to revive that project. I sent a Mesabi Tribune article to the Q&A session about that. Just an FYI, this morning we were celebrating its demise, and then this afternoon it's reemerged. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's really great information to know. So having said that, we're going to wrap this up and move towards our meeting. So I just wanted to see if there's any final thoughts from Scott, Chris, or Libby, kind of a call to action that we always like to kind of end our forums with a call to action. And I know we've talked about it already, but you just want to wrap this up with one big one about some of the important points you've talked about thus far as people and our members can do during this legislative session and next in case this doesn't work out this year.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it is going to be a this year and next year thing and continuing. I would say, shameless plug, sign up for our newsletter. We'll have more information on this. Do take action notices. I know Greg will send one. I know you'll have your own. We have some who, it doesn't matter what organization you use, Duluth for Clean Water, just contact your legislator. And if you can join us on Tuesday or either on Tuesday for the press conference at the Capitol, Tuesday the 21st or April 4th, Tuesday, April 4th, we'd love to have you and it would be a huge help.
Great. Now I'll just echo what Scott said. Those are two key dates, the press conference, February 21st, next Tuesday, and then April 4th, the Friends of the Boundary Waters rally at the state capitol. And your voices really do matter. So a phone call to the offices, they do keep a tally. If you call your representatives or senators, do that. That will make a difference, or send them an email that you are the most important thing to them as a constituent, and that in your email or your phone call or your letter is worth 25 letters or emails or phone calls from someone outside the district. So contact your elected representatives, and we will have our if you want to attend at lunchtime this Wednesday, a lunch with the Friends with Senator Jen McEwen, and I think Representative Sandra Feist too will be part of that, talking about that Prove It First and the rest of the legislative agenda. And so you are key, and as part of the DFL, also keep your voice to Chairman Ken Martin too. I think that's important. In the DFL Environmental Caucus, in the DFL ecosystem, there, letting Chairman Ken Martin know your views is really important.
And I guess all I'll say is that thanks so much for everybody. As far as I know, it was this group that started the Prove It First movement in Minnesota, with Kristen Larson and others all the way back in the day, and so this is your movement more than even ours or anyone else's. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for being so engaged, because we will get this passed and eventually, and it will be because of this group right here.
Yeah, and I was in the room that day at the Audubon, which is now Osprey Wild, with Kristen and Aaron Clems. And this was back before either of you were with Friends of the Boundary Waters. Paul Danachek was still there when they were looking at each other across the room and decided this would be the great way to, because this was in 2013, it was an election year coming up, propose this as a resolution at the caucuses. So yeah, it was our former vice chair sitting across the room with Kristen Larson about 2 or 3 years before this caucus was formed, that idea to propose it as a resolution. It was a memorable day. Okay, well, thank you so much, Chris, Scott, Libby. I know even Senator McEwen, who's gone today. Please stay in touch. We can sign on to newsletters from Friends of the Boundary Waters and from the Environmental Caucus. And like they said, and Senator Feist, Representative Feist and Senator Pappas has told me this previously, a personal letter to your representative speaks way more to anything than signing on to a form letter. Don't get me wrong, we love you to sign on to our form letters, but taking the time to just write a few sentences to them about why this is important to you really does speak a lot more highly and more personally. Because this is one thing that I just remember hearing from Paul Wellstone's former chief of staff, is how much a constituent letter could do. That's how the Mental Health Parity Act got passed, was a letter from a constituent. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We're going to move on to our meeting.
Thank you.
So, if you guys want to, everyone who wants to stick around, will be great. It should not be long, probably about 20 minutes. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.